Hey, Erica.
All right, are you recording? Yes, okay. Welcome everybody to the Urban Ecology Collaborative. We are a group of groups. We focus mainly in the New England and Mid-Atlantic regions, and we meet virtually on the third Wednesday of every month to talk about urban forestry and related topics. We have a Google Groups forum, and that's for sharing about upcoming events, research, jobs, urban forestry topics, and asking questions. And it's also where we announce our upcoming meetings. You can always find our meeting recordings at our YouTube, Urban Ecology Collaborative on YouTube. We try to post those pretty quickly after the recordings if you can't make it. So today we're really excited to be welcoming Brian Crooks, and I need to pull up our intro for you, Brian, which we usually read. So Brian is going to be talking about his tree risk assessment qualification process. Something he describes as one of his best professional development achievements in his career yet. Very exciting. And he's going to talk about the ISA Tree Risk Assessment Qualification, or TRAQ, and share insights and applications from his role as a community forester in Western Pennsylvania. I won't read the rest of the bio. We sent that out to everyone, but we're going to hand it over to Brian in a few minutes. First, we do usually like to ask if anyone in the room has any community updates that they'd like to share with the group. So we'll leave some time. People can just unmute and say those updates, or you can use the raise hand feature and we will call on you. I don't see any hands, but if you're thinking of an update, please raise your hand or let us know what your update is. I think one update that we have is that for our September 18th meeting, we're super excited to be requesting one slide from each coalition for urban forestry tree coalitions that we've seen forming, some as a result of the Inflation Reduction Act funding, some that existed before. And what we mean by an urban forestry coalition is really kind of a group of different organizations that are coming together to accomplish urban forestry in a municipality or at a larger scale. We mentioned the Boston Tree Alliance, the Philly Tree Coalition, the Pittsburgh Canopy Coalition. I might be getting their full title wrong, but we thought it would be nice to kind of compare across the region. How are these working? What's the structure and mechanism, especially as some of them are forming now and could be able to use some of those ideas. So if you could get a slide about a coalition near you, or ask those folks if they could come to the meeting, we'd be really excited to hear from them. I will not be at the meeting because I think I will be volunteering for Saluting Branches, which, if you have not heard, that is an arborist kind of volunteer day. They're celebrating their 10th annual day of service on the third Wednesday in September, so September 18th this year. And they will do things like pruning trees in the national veteran cemeteries and other kind of arboricultural work. So I'll be sorry to miss it, but I'll watch the recording. And Phil, I see you're on camera. Do you have an update for us?
Well, on a lighter note, one of the members of this community has had a baby. So Sophia Rodbell, she's city forester for Hartford, Connecticut, and she had a strapping baby boy on August 25th. So I want to share it with this community, and hopefully she's on here at some point. Probably in November she'll get back online. But this is a community I cherish, and I just wanted to share. I'm an OPA, so there you go. Yeah, I love you all, and look forward to your presentation, Brian.
That's so exciting, Phil. Thanks for sharing that. I love to hear it, and good luck to her and the baby boy. Congrats on being an OPA. And with that happy announcement, let's hand it over to Brian to introduce himself and talk about tree risk assessment.
Thank you. Thanks, Clara and Erica. I'm just gonna share my screen here and get my PowerPoint up. All right, just give me a thumbs up. You guys see that on the screen there? Cool, great, thank you. Yes, I'm just gonna join to talk a bit today about tree risk assessment. I work pretty closely with Clara. I know her pretty well at Tree Pittsburgh. I'm a fellow Pittsburgh joiner from the group here. So thanks for including all of us here to talk about trees. I really thought that this tree risk assessment qualification or track, I'll say track a lot, TRAQ, that's just the acronym for it, was definitely one of the best, probably the best professional development I've sought out in my career so far. I've had my arborist certification for about 10 years now. I got that back in 2015 when I started my job with WPC, and then elected just recently earlier this year to pursue the track certification. I've really found a lot of benefit to it, and I'm hoping to encourage others, whether you personally joining or others who might work at the same organizations as folks who are joining, might be interested in pursuing this as well. So I'm just going to talk a bit about the whole process I went through and just give you some more information about it. Let me just advance my slides. Did you see that advance to the next slide? Great, perfect. All right. So full disclaimer first to start, I want to just clarify that I'm not here to instruct upon the process of tree risk assessment. I am not qualified to be a teacher of this course. I'm not probably even legally allowed technically to actually instruct upon this. The goal of my talk is rather just to say why I chose this certification, how it's been helpful to my career, and hopefully encourage some of you to seek this out on your own or through your organization. I will also share a disclaimer through the ISA, that's the International Society of Arboriculture. This is the primary manual I use to study for the course, and I will be referencing a few things from this manual as well. So I do provide, just as a technicality, the disclaimer that the ISA provides within the very front of that manual, basically saying that they are not responsible for any tree risk assessment that any of us would go out and do on our own. It's tree risk assessment has risk to it. So if you have any questions about the legality of the ISA or what I'm doing here, feel free to reach out in the chat or ask later. But I just want to add these disclaimers just before I proceed further. So my roles are primarily, I'm a community forester with the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy in Pittsburgh. I've been at this position since 2015. I mainly work in tree planting and helping other partnerships here in Pittsburgh and Allegheny County to do urban plantings, either in streets or parks or other urban areas. I work with tree inventories, with ordinances, with even ecological assessments in urban parks, and some tree maintenance, although it's mainly young tree training and pruning. I'm not really in the tree service industry, but this is my primary role. I'm seeing a lot of trees. I'm interacting with the public very frequently. So this is the main driver for why I chose to pursue the tree risk assessment qualification. In my personal time, I live in Oakmont, Pennsylvania, just outside of Pittsburgh. I've been directing the Shade Tree Commission there for about the last 6 years. I'm sure you're all familiar with what a Shade Tree Commission is. That's what we do. I'll just leave it at that. And I also work as an arborist for Overstory. It's not an arborist as far as a tree service industry. It's more of remote imagery analysis. So this is a tech startup out of the Netherlands that they're using AI and machine learning to develop satellite vegetation intelligence products, mainly for utility companies. So I spend a lot of time looking at imagery and trying to help with some machine learning for helping with those projects. But mostly my work at WPC and Oakmont is what drove me to pursue this role. Very important though, what my role is not is I am not in the tree service industry. I'm not in plant healthcare. So I'm not climbing trees. I'm not removing trees. I'm not pruning trees. And this is kind of my big point for what I'm hoping to encourage folks who might work in things like extension or nonprofits or municipal administration to try to get these tree risk assessment education materials out to more of the public and the industry beyond just the tree service industry. Because and nothing to I'm not talking badly about the tree service industry by any means. There's plenty of reputable companies out there and reputable people, but we do tend to rely on the bulk of tree risk assessment for companies who are also for profit for tree removal and for tree maintenance. So I see a need in my ideal scenario of how tree assessment and tree decisions work is we have more unbiased independent consultants who are doing the tree risk assessment, and then it moves on to a tree service industry from there to do the work that the property owner then elects to do once they've had an assessment with an unbiased tree risk assessor. There's a little background of what track is. It starts with the tree risk assessor. So in this case, that would be me. Someone calls me and says, hey, I'm the property owner or the manager of this certain area. I'd like to have this tree or trees looked at. Can you come out and assess this tree for risk? And I come out and through a very formal process using the form that you see there in the background, I do an assessment that ultimately leads to a risk rating of that tree. And I communicate that to that property manager. Then I also provide mitigation options for what could lower that risk and hopefully lower it to below the acceptable threshold of risk for the property owner. And then the property manager will then elect to do or not do anything from there. So I, as the tree risk assessor, do not decide what gets done. I simply come out, I assess, I provide information, and then I give the options to the property manager, and then they decide what to do or not to do from there. It could be a dead tree leaning over a house, and they say they don't want to do anything with it. It could be a fully canopied tree in a park away from anything, and they might want to remove it. It's all up to the property manager to decide what to do. But hopefully by talking with us as qualified professionals, we can help them in the process of making a better informed decision on what might be the right thing to proceed from there. Now, the purpose of tree risk assessment is to reduce risk, and that's really important. It's not to eliminate risk, it's to reduce risk. And this quote I'll put up next is right out of one of the very first pages of that ISA manual. It is impossible to maintain trees free of risk. Some level of risk must be accepted to experience the benefits the trees provide. We all know that trees provide incredible benefits, some that are entirely necessary for life, including the production and maintenance of the oxygen that we breathe. However, the only way to eliminate risk from a tree is to fully remove the tree. So we know that we can't eliminate all tree risk and just clear cut the entire planet and remove all trees. We have to reduce the risk to acceptable levels, not necessarily eliminate the risk to no level. Although tree removal, of course, may be necessary in certain situations. Now, all trees will fail. It's inevitable when the force exerted upon that tree or part of the tree exceeds the load-bearing capacity of that tree. It's inevitable. We've all heard people say, well, that tree is so big, whenever it falls, I'm worried it's going to fall. And I agree that there could be some concern that the tree may fall eventually, but that's also just inevitable, where we can't remove a tree just because it may fail in the future. It will fail. Hopefully, then we remove it at the right time and maintain it throughout to prolong that lifespan of the tree, and then preemptively remove it once it becomes fully necessary to do so. The goal is to only completely remove a tree when no other mitigation options are acceptable. So everyone has their own personal level of risk, whether that's to a tree, whether that's to driving a car, whether that's to anything we do. We all have our own level of risk when we evaluate what we're going to do about something. And so a property owner has their own acceptable level of risk for the tree outside their home or their school or their business. And hopefully the mitigation options we can offer will lower that below that threshold without removal of the tree, although removal may be necessary in certain situations. And the mitigation options can also extend to beyond just the tree. How can we manipulate the target? Sometimes it can be a movable target, like a picnic table in a park. That's just move the picnic table outside of the target zone and not encourage people to sit under a tree that may have some poor structured branches further up in the tree. We can still work on the tree, but until we get a tree service company out to work on it, that's just cordon off the area, restrict access, perhaps move an unnecessary or movable target somewhere outside the target zone. Now, this is one of the first ways that tree risk assessment training has helped me. It's improved my communication. We've all heard someone ask us, is something wrong with my tree? Is my tree safe? Is my tree healthy? Or, well, while you're here, can you just look at this tree in my backyard? It happens all the time. And we really need to be careful how we communicate, because whether we're certified or not, we are all looked upon as professionals. So what we say, whether it actually has real meaning behind it or not, it's going to be inferred that we are professionals and we're giving this advice to the property owner. So what I want to do is I'm going to pull over a video here from this other screen. And I'm going to play it here. This is in Oakmont just a few years ago. I'll make the screen a little bigger too once I start playing. But what I want you to do, it's about 2 minutes long. What scares me the most about this video is what the reporter says in the final 5 or 6 seconds of the report.
Uprooting trees. This one crashed into 2 houses in Oakmont, and it was a big one. Good evening, and thanks so much for joining us. I'm Lisa Sylvester.
I'm David Johnson. From storm damage to rescues and power outages, our team of reporters spread out around the area, and we start with Channel 11's Amy Hudak, who is in Oakmont in Allegheny County.
David, neighbors say this sounded like a massive crash on the parkway, and I want to show you the aftermath here. That tree uprooting right out of the earth. You can see that root ball just standing in the front yard of this house right now. The tree actually came down, it clipped the corner of this brick house, and then that tree just slammed into the back of the neighbor's house. It actually went through the bathroom, that's what we're told. A 5-week-old baby was actually sleeping in the downstairs of the house that the tree just just narrowly missed. Neighbors say this was an absolute miracle. You can see shutters that right now are twisted and tangled in those trees. And we actually had a chance to go to the back of the house. Some of the tree crews brought us back there when it was safe to do so. And when we went back there, we could see 2 cars that were crushed by this tree. Both had been totaled. And the tree crews told us the tree actually hit the neighbor's house with such force that it actually shifted the foundation. You could see the bricks have actually moved sideways on the house. That's the impact of this tree coming down. One of the neighbors who was inside at the time tells us what it was like.
When I opened up the door to the back bedroom, the whole back of the house is has a tree in it. It's a huge tree.
The neighbors say they're just thankful to be okay. Obviously, they are shaken up at this time. An unbelievable sight out here in Oakmont, some of the worst damage by far that we have seen today. And this neighbor actually tells me an arborist had just come out to assess this tree and told the neighbors it was safe. They're now dealing with this kind of cleanup tonight. Live in Oakmont, Amy Hudak.
All right, so crazy story. I saw that tree when it fell. That was just a couple years ago, so I went out and took a look at it. It was a private property tree. It wasn't in our jurisdiction for the Shade Tree Commission, but nonetheless, I went out and took a look, and it was definitely a huge mess up there. But they were told the tree was safe, and so I want to just talk a bit what happened there. Someone came out, an arborist. We don't know who or what their qualifications were. Were they someone who really was an arborist or just someone who had a little bit of experience? Were they certified or not? We don't know what their experience level was, but some arborist came out and said that the tree was safe. Now, did they actually say the tree was safe? If so, that's a big thing I learned on this certification was you have to be careful what we say. Just because we see the tree and the tree looks healthy, it's fully foliated, the trunk has no visible decay. We know that there can still be decay inside a trunk that we can't see, or roots can be decayed to the point we can't see. Not all root rot fungi produce a visible fruiting body. So we have to be careful when we're saying what we see and what we're inferring based off of that, or what are we communicating the tree is safe or healthy or not. Now also too, was it just a miscommunication? Did the arborist say something and that the homeowner then interpreted as that meaning the tree was safe? Was it potentially said to be safe under certain conditions? Did the arborist do a proper tree risk assessment and say this tree is unlikely to fail under normal weather conditions? But keep in mind the nature of this video. They had a whole team of people at the very beginning, the meteorologists, reporters. Clearly there was damage all across the county and beyond that day it was a very large wind storm event throughout all of Western Pennsylvania. So this was not necessarily a normal circumstance. Weather was very strong, severe thunderstorms, high winds. It probably exceeded what we would consider to be a normal weather experience. So there's a lot of things to think about with how that was communicated, but was the tree actually safe? What was the language for doing that? So I encourage us all when we're talking about language and thinking about how we're communicating to all these stakeholders, it's more important to say what we observe or not observe than what we infer, what we assume from that. Clarify the uncertainties. Is it a certain time of year where certain things might not be visible to see in the tree? Is it winter and the canopy is not leafed out? So we're kind of making some inferences on what we're looking at with that time of year. Recommend further assessment. We can always assess a tree and say, you know what, if you're still concerned after this, we recommend further assessment with advanced technology. Contact a different arborist who can offer this type of advanced assessment. And also decline the consult. We don't have to accept every invitation we have to look at a tree. I love to look at trees. I'd love to talk about trees. I could talk forever about them with people, especially friendly people who are very happy to see us around and doing good work with trees. But just say, you know, this tree is outside of our scope of work. I'm not able to look at it at this time, or it exceeds my professional qualifications. I recommend you consulting a different arborist for this consultation. The second thing I learned through track was that we all tend to have perhaps an inflated level of risk for a tree. And that includes us as assessors. As I was starting the process in the first day of the training, I tended to give trees a higher level of risk than what the course said they were. And that was because I was inflating some different parts and how I look at the tree. So if I, as a professional, am biased towards leaning towards a higher risk, certainly folks from the public may be as well. So I want to give this picture here as an example. This is actually my house. This is my tree in front of my house. That's my Subaru Outback out there in the street. I sit inside that car in that exact spot quite a lot. Not so much now because the spotted lanternflies are dropping their honeydew all over the car. So I park elsewhere for right now. But that car's there quite a bit. So if we're looking at this tree, how often have you heard someone say, this tree is so big, if it falls on somebody, it's going to kill them? Now, I don't dispute that. If that tree were to fall on me in my car, it very well could kill me or seriously harm me. I don't dispute that. However, tree risk assessment looks at three very important things. First off, the tree actually has to fail. The tree might fail someday, but it actually has to cause a problem. Think of driving a car. We are way more likely to be harmed in a car accident than we are by a tree. If I asked you all to raise your hand if you've ever been in a car accident, or you know someone who's been in a car accident, everyone's hand is probably up. Driving a car is significantly more risky than being harmed by a tree. Yet we mitigate that by wearing our seatbelts, driving the speed limit, getting our cars inspected. Only in very extreme situations, like we just had cataract surgery or it snowed 12 inches, do we actually remove driving from what we're going to do. However, we're so quick to completely remove the tree from the site to remove risk. So just thinking about what we're doing elsewhere in life, trying to just ground people in risk as a whole and talk about the tree versus other things we do. Then let's say the tree does fail. When this tree fails, it actually has to hit someone. And this is the biggest thing. The occupancy rate of the target zone is often overestimated. Now, if we're looking at the target as just my car is there a decent amount. However, I get in the car, I drive to work. I don't park there much now because of the spotted lanternflies. It's also street sweeping at least one day a week, so I can't park on that side of the street. My car really isn't there 7 days a week, 365 days a year. If we look more at me personally, at my car, how often am I actually sitting there in the car? When we all leave to work, we get in our car, we put our stuff in the car, maybe adjust the mirrors, turn on the radio, put on Google Maps, but in like 3 or 4 minutes, we're probably gone. Same thing when we get home. When we get home for the day, do we sit in our car for 2 hours before we come inside? No, we park, we get our stuff, we gather, we walk inside. So really a person occupying this target zone is much lower than what we may think. Even people walking on that sidewalk, this is not a very busy street. How often are there actually people present for the tree to fall on? And then there has to be consequences. Now, certainly the consequences of a tree falling on a person is always significant or severe, but we look at other targets like maybe a picnic table, a play area, the consequences of hitting a movable slide or swing set is certainly less, or even the house. My wife works in the very top floor of the house right there. It's on the side facing the home. She works from home. She's there all the time. But if this tree were to fall towards my house, it's really just the upper canopy hitting it. I may have some siding damage, some shingle damage, but this tree is not going to go inside my house if it were to fall in that direction. So the consequences of hitting my house are not that significant. And here's another example from one of the county parks in Allegheny County. This is Deer Lakes County Park. I was just there a few weeks ago to do some tree risk assessment. I saw this tree in mid-July and I thought, yikes, this tree has a lot of stuff going wrong with it. It's a black cherry, included bark everywhere, dead canopy, decayed trunks. This was a really bad looking tree. And I said, this tree is an imminent failure. It's either failing right now or it will fail imminently, even under normal weather conditions. And 9 days later, it looked like this. It did fail under normal weather conditions. Part of it failed there in the upper canopy on the left side. Here's what it now looks like on the back. Still yikes, still a bad tree. And a few days later, more did fail. County Parks came and cleaned it all up. This is what the tree looks like now, at least what it looked like a few weeks ago. Maybe it's not standing anymore. That's highly possible, as this is the back end of the tree too. But even though this tree was an imminent failure, you cannot assess a tree to be more likely to fail than saying it's imminent. That said, though, when I assessed this tree, I said the risk to people from this tree was still very low because there's nothing around here. The closest road is outside of the fall zone. There's no park equipment, no swings, no pavilions, no anything. The only human that exists in this space in any regular basis is whoever runs the lawnmower, maybe every week, maybe every other week, even less because it's been so dry in Pennsylvania this year. Maybe the grass isn't even being mowed that much. So yeah, it's very, very low risk because there's actually no viable target nearby for the tree to fall on when it does fall. Similarly, we have two other trees in that park. The one on the left is a small utility topped pine, a big oak on the right. Both have dead branches. These branches could fall on the picnic tables and potentially hit someone. How do we respond? Well, we cordon off the area, restrict access, maybe move the picnic tables out of the fall zone. But keep in mind too, that the tree on the left, the branch is only falling maybe 12 feet at most. The branch on the right is falling several stories. So certainly the branch falling with more force is of more concern and potential consequence when it impacts that table or someone at that table than the tree on the left. And a final tree in Deer Lakes was this one by the splash pad. Now this was a very busy day. I was here on a 90, 95 degree day. It was already that hot at 10, 11 o'clock in the morning. This was packed. It's summertime. School buses were bringing loads and loads of people there. The benches were packed. The playground equipment was packed. Lots and lots of people. There's a lot wrong with this tree too. Look at this big section on the left, how it's cracking on the left and separating already. I've got a completely dead central leader further up. Lots of decay in the trunk, and the roots don't look that hot either. So there's a lot concerning with this tree. Also, the prevailing wind direction when this tree does fall, probably going to fall right towards that play area. Now, even though I said this tree was probable to fall under normal weather conditions, the risk was still low because of the occupancy rate within a 1-year time frame from the date I assessed the trees. We look at 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. How often are people actually occupying the splash pad? This park is only open during daylight hours, so at least half the day there can't be people there. What's a day look like in the middle of the summer versus a day in January, February, a weekday versus a weekend? And when this tree does fail, it's probably going to fall in a storm. Most likely people aren't recreating here when there's a thunderstorm at the splash pad. So occupancy rate is a big thing for making sure we're understanding that occupancy rate within the entire time frame of the assessment, to make sure we're not overestimating the risk that may be associated with this tree. And the final reason why this has been really helpful for my job is equity. Now we're talking a lot about green equity these days, environmental equity, looking at justice areas. This map is by census block, so it's showing census blocks in the Pittsburgh area where it's lower income, lower canopy cover, where we need to devote resources to for getting benefits of trees. Now, unfortunately, tree work is very expensive. And if you are having a hard time meeting a budget, you're very likely not going to be able to hire very quality arborist care. Certainly, you're not going to hire me first and pay me money to come out and look at your tree. And then I'll recommend service from there that you then pay someone else to do work from there. So what I encourage is folks who work in extension, work in nonprofits, we have funding, like WPC and others in Pittsburgh, we're grant funded to do work in these environmental justice areas. I can come out without any cost to a certain stakeholder and assess a tree, give very quality, hopefully very quality advice or assessment of what this tree is, what's happening with this tree. And then hopefully that leads to better decision making and hopefully hiring someone who's qualified to do the work from there. So there's a really good call to action here for folks who are working often in lower income or equity neighborhoods. We need more professional arborist services for consulting happening in these neighborhoods. And here's a great example. Now I blurred the area because I didn't get his actual permission to include this photo. This is a friend of mine and he lives on the street in Pittsburgh. And we were at a Pirates game the other day and he said, "Oh, I got to show you this picture of this tree, Brian, because this tree, it's the funniest looking tree ever." He doesn't know anything about trees, but he knew that though something about this tree was not right and this was probably wrong. And yikes, right? He's totally right. This tree has a lot of horrible things happening to it, all thanks to people. And I asked him, I said, "Did you see the tree company that was doing work here?" And he said, "No, but he knows that it was just some goober that the property owner hired." That was his words. So what happened here? We either don't have the money or we don't want to spend the money on proper tree assessment or tree work. So what happens? We hire goobers. We all know that anyone can call themselves a forester, get a white bucket truck with no insignia on it. Maybe it says budget tree service or whatever, and this is what you get. It ends up having poor quality work or even unnecessary work, selling a product that you don't even need. Did this tree actually need to have branches removed? Maybe it didn't. So it was unnecessary work. If it did need that, it needed to be done in a better quality way. It leads to a higher likelihood of failure. We all know that trees are levers. The fulcrum is the stump. So whenever you increase that center of mass higher up the tree, you're just making the bending moment be larger. So now this tree has a higher bending moment in a storm. it's more likely to fail. Same with lion tailing. That's why lion tailing on a branch is bad. You move the center of mass out away from the trunk. Now the branch moves further vertically and it's more likely to fail. So all we've done is we've spent some amount of money doing this poor quality work only to increase the likelihood of failure of this tree. We've spent more money and potentially now we have more consequences. Best case scenario is someone removes this tree in the very near future before it fails. Worst case, it's going to fall, most likely on that home, actually, based off of the prevailing wind direction. Maybe it harms someone, kills someone. At the very least, it's just a very big inconvenience, which only makes negative public opinion of trees more prevalent, and it lowers your acceptable risk of trees. If you live on the street or anywhere in the neighborhood, once this tree does fail and it does hurt someone, you're now more likely to have your own tree removed or be hesitant to have more trees planted. And all this does is just compound the inequity that we have in the low income or low canopy neighborhoods. Here's another example in a municipality outside of Pittsburgh. I was called in to do some tree risk assessment recently with the city supervisor. We looked at several trees this day, and this was the last tree of the day that we looked at. This tree had a lightning strike initially. It looked pretty fine beforehand, but the lightning strike did the initial damage. It was in the process of being removed. That's why there's some branches you can see that are cut away from the tree. But then something happened. The chipper broke. And so the tree company stopped working. Now, I submit that you don't need a functioning chipper in order to cut this tree apart and lower it to the ground. You don't leave a tree in a more hazardous situation than it already was. So my first recommendation was for the city manager to move his red truck out of that parking lot right now. Also cordon off that parking lot, because there was an event in that pavilion. It's just off screen on the right is a pavilion. There was a big gathering, dozens and dozens of people. This parking lot was full to capacity except for this section over here by the tree. I told the city manager, cordon off this parking lot now, restrict access, and get the tree removed completely as soon as you possibly can. So maybe this tree company was a quality company, but they didn't make a quality decision when their machinery malfunctioned for the day. So hopefully I'm giving you a call to action that we need more tree risk assessment qualified individuals out there doing consulting, talking with stakeholders. All it does is just increase the professional services that we can offer to all the stakeholders we work with, leads to better decision making, ultimately better risk. We're going to hopefully maintain more trees because we're maintaining them well, and we're also helping people understand what the risk of that tree might actually be. And hopefully through all this good work, we're encouraging more planting to happen, because I really think that the worst thing you can do as far as advocating for new tree planting is to let existing trees get to the point where something fails, and that can undo years and years and years of advocacy and trust in building a relationship for planting. Who should be track certified? Well, everybody should in the industry, but certainly tree care industry and plant healthcare, as since we're relying on them as the primary component of tree risk assessment. Certainly someone on every arborist company should be certified, but extension, nonprofit like myself, conservation, municipalities. I always think of the guy that runs the street sweeper here in Oakmont. He basically does a level 1 tree assessment every week by driving his street sweeper up and down every single. He sees the trees more often than I do because he's running that sweeper next to all the trees. He should at least be trained in what tree risk looks like so he can report that as he's riding his street sweeper around. Institutions, schools, hospitals, consulting foresters, and this is a big thing too. Tree work is dangerous, especially in the tree care industry. It's very dangerous work. As we get older, or potentially we start families and we don't want to work in that dangerous field, being certified in tree risk assessment is a way to stay relevant in the arboriculture field. You don't have to do a formal tree risk assessment just because you're certified. You don't have to go through this form that's over here and do this. Just being informed on what tree risk is, being able to have a very educated conversation with a concerned stakeholder and point them in the right direction. So don't be fearful that just because you're certified in this, you have to do these formal reports or anything. You do these if you want. You do this if you're qualified to and if you feel comfortable doing, but ultimately just having the knowledge base and the communication base is really important. It's a really great process. First, you have to be certified as an arborist. So get your arborist certification first. And then if you want to do track certification, it's a 3-day in-person process. I traveled to Columbus, Ohio for it. That was the closest one at that time. I also had some family there, so it made it an easier way to travel and get there. But It's a 3-day process, usually a Wednesday through Friday. Wednesday, Thursday are in person, in class, and out in the field training. Friday is the half-day exam format. Good news, you don't need continuing education units to keep your track certification active. All you do is every 5 years, you attend a 1-day in-person retraining. Usually it's on the Tuesday of those 3-day trainings where they're training all the new people Wednesday through Friday. They do a retraining of people who are already certified that Tuesday right before. And good news too is when you attend these tree risk assessment trainings, you get CEUs towards your arborist certification. And it's actually quite a lot of them too. You get quite a bit from attending those. It's a really nice way to partner those two certifications with each other. And then you get this lovely certificate saying that you are certified in tree risk assessment. You can now take that out and hopefully be, a good resource to whomever you might be serving, whether it's for profit or nonprofit. There's a lot of great ways to use tree risk assessment in an appropriate way to hopefully better whatever the mission is of the organization you may work with. So thank you for having me. That's all I have for the talk. And my email is down there as well. Feel free to email me if you have any questions. I'm always happy to talk trees with anyone. So feel free to ping me and ask questions. I look forward to talking with you. So with that, I will turn it back over to Clara and Erica.
Thank you so much, Brian. What a great talk and representation of the track certification. I have the manual here, but I don't have the cert. And right before this call, the reason I was a little bit late in joining was that I was actually working on a tree assessment form for the city that I work in. So I'm going to get to the questions in the chat, but I just had one question for you. You said you recommend that everyone get this certification. Can you talk a little bit more about, selfishly, your experience working with municipalities and how the skill set can help them? Is it that, city, you think maybe the town manager should be track qualified or should know who the track qualified people in their area are? Or has there been any intersection with ordinances that you'd like to delve into a little bit more?
Yeah, great question. I definitely think if there is someone, if the town's big enough and has enough people on staff, particularly within the Department of Public Works or street crew, or maybe a parks crew, if there's a park supervisor, I think those are great roles to be track certified. Maybe not the borough manager or someone that's higher up in admin, but someone who's kind of on the boots on the ground position every day is a good one to have someone. We have a small street crew in Oakmont and a parks crew, and there's one person that one position that could potentially be incorporated into to have that tree risk assessment qualification. Ultimately, just knowing who the certified people are. There is a way to, on the ISA website, you can elect if you want to have your name and contact information listed for the Find the Arborist tool. And all of your certifications will be automatically uploaded onto that. So mine, if you get logged on there, we'll see it has ISA certified arborist plus track. If you're a board certified master arborist, or you're certified in tree climbing, all these other ones that are on there, the utility, those will also populate on there as well. So you can filter to find someone who's certified in track within a certain mileage of your zip code and hopefully get connected with someone from there. Or just word of mouth through partnerships. Like, we know quite a few municipal stakeholders through the work we do with WPC and Tree Pittsburgh and others. So just knowing that knowing at least the organization, they might contact Tree Pittsburgh or might contact WPC, and then we can float them to the right person that would potentially be certified in our Canopy Alliance partnership too. So definitely something that's worth every municipality being connected to.
Awesome. Very nice. So we have a good question from Becca Rooney. It was while you were presenting, and Becca's asking, when thinking about risk to property damage, do you consider a person's capacity to recover or replace damaged property? For example, losing a car when there isn't a capacity to replace it via insurance coverage. In a case like that, would you assign a higher risk?
That's a good question, and that kind of gets floating into the category where the disclaimer, I'm kind of not fully qualified to instruct. I would say my own personal opinion that is not affiliated with necessarily the tree risk assessment study materials is that not looking at what the type of car is or the replacement value. It's more of just a car in general and the mechanics of the structure of what the tree is hitting. So cars for the most part are considered equal, whether it's a Porsche or whether it's an old junker pickup truck. So it's looking more at just, same with people. We're not assigning that one person is more valuable than another. Same with a car in the same way. At least that's how I was interpreting things when I learned there. But I'll leave it at that and just encourage that questions kind of like that would be better suited for someone who teaches the course for tree risk assessment.
Great, thank you. Dana is asking what type and amount of preparation is needed for the 3-day class to pass certification exam is what they're after.
Good question. I studied a bit. I also kind of like studying a little bit too. I'm kind of weird. So I studied in advance. The manual was, if you have any knowledge in tree anything, it's a pretty easy read. There's nothing in there that's super new. The only category that was more new to me was more so just things like occupancy rate. And you're more so you're taking things you already know and you're just applying them in a different way. So I studied a bit in advance. You can get the manual several months in advance. I actually studied for quite a lot longer than some because I was scheduled to go in October of last year, and I got COVID right before I got there. So I ended up rescheduling for May of this year. So I actually had the study materials for longer than you typically would because of rescheduling, but it's a very easy manual to get through. There were definitely people there that didn't read anything or do anything, and they went just fine in the course as well. The course is structured as if you really didn't read any of the manual in advance. And there's honestly more benefit, I think, to the in-field examples. You'll go out with instructors and you'll look at different trees and the instructor will talk through the whole process for different trees with you, different species, different scenarios, different types of targets in the target zone. And so having someone who's been doing tree risk assessment for decades and can really talk to that nature, that was one of the biggest benefits. It was just sponging all the information from them and learning from their experience, and less so about the actual mechanics in the book and everything too. But definitely would encourage you to read that orange book in advance. There were other things that came along too, and I just stuck with the manual, and that was pretty acceptable for training from there.
Great. I see, Phil, you're on camera again. Do you want to ask your question or say some things out loud?
Yeah, well, I thanks, Brian. It was a great presentation, and track training is amazing. It's an important evolution of our assessment tools. I put an article actually at the ISA conference last week, and Dr. Andrew Kozer shared this article that many of the defects that are indicators of potential failure are actually, we should just call them different. That he couldn't link included bark, codominant stems, multiple branches emerging from one location, and overextended branches. In Hurricane Ian, they did a study before and after. They had assessed 1,500 trees, and they found that there was no statistical connection between those defects, which he now calls just different, than other trees. And so it's easy to have a defect call out to you and say, oh, well, we got it. How can I, as a professional, say it's safe if it has this defect? Where in the training, are there philosophical discussions about risk and hazard as a professional rating? Because you could tilt towards removing more trees than not.
Yes, absolutely. There were definitely very good conversations. It was very interactive. So there's usually 20 or 30 people in this course. So it's small enough that you can have pretty engaging conversations. And there definitely are philosophical questions, just like you're saying. And even on the term defect, they're trending less towards saying defect and more of just condition of concern was a typical terminology for that. So these conditions of concern that may or may not be defective, but there's something that we see and we may want to investigate further on the tree. Definitely one thing they say often in the training is that tree risk assessment is very subjective. So when you put multiple arborists assessing the same tree, there is going to be a range. And when you're giving the risk ratings, they're qualitative. You're not giving a numerical rating for, you're using a matrix system. So all of those three categories, likelihood of failure, likelihood of impact, those are put in a matrix that gives you a term, and then you use that term with the matrix for condition for consequences, and that gives you your overall risk rating. So it is qualitative, it is subjective, and that's also one of the disclaimers to put in. Anyone who does this should have a basic disclaimer saying, you know, it is subjective. There's also uncertainties of what we can see, recommending further assessments for things you can't see. Also, just the fact that the tree risk assessment is outdated the second that you leave the property, because you're assessing the tree according to the condition the tree is then. You will assign a 1 year or a 3 year time period maybe for the assessment, but you also have a disclaimer saying, like, if you change the grade of the soil, or you come in and buzz saw the roots off to replace a sidewalk or something, or a hurricane hits tomorrow, those are outside of the normal conditions we're assessing the tree for. So there is a lot of legalese that if you were going to do this as a profession for consulting, you would want to make sure you have those disclaimers present. That kind of helps protect you within reason to some of that subjectivity with philosophical differences on whether a tree should be removed based off of this concern or this concern. So yeah.
And what's unique in New England, I guess we're waiting for that next ice storm, right? And that's a very specific type of storm, the weight of the tree. So it puts this heavy weight downward versus a hurricane that you can't really predict. So I would think we're in track training regionally, we would be looking specifically for ice loading as a potential risk that would put pressure on a tree. Is that something you look at?
Definitely, yeah. And even on the form, before you get to actually looking at the tree, you're filling out things in that form just based off of the site conditions or the site history. And part of that is recognizing what conditions are normal for that location. So for example, you might check the ice storm box for a tree assessment in Massachusetts, but you may not check that box for a different state somewhere else. So yeah, you're definitely looking, and also the species profile of the tree, all the specific things about the tree and the site. You're considering that before you even start quantifying or qualitatively assessing the merits of the tree itself and its likelihood of failure in the target zone and things like that. So yeah, good question.
And then finally, Erica and Clara, yeah, there was, I believe you said that these are qualitative ratings. And I think New York City was trying to put numbers, a numerical score on track so that they could incorporate the data into their inventory. I don't know if anyone here is aware of that or has any updates on how they're doing that, but it was somewhat revolutionary when they were doing it.
Yeah, I would need to do my homework on that, Phil.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Brian.
Unless someone from New York is on the line and want to say something.
We usually have a lot of New York people, but I'm not sure if anyone here is from New York or able to speak. I think I have heard of things like this. I'm very interested in this because you know, municipal, I think what you said, Brian, about kind of the tree risk assessment being subjective and like how you would rate risk higher when you were in certain like parts of your career than when you've done more tree risk assessments and things like that. I'm actually experiencing that now. In a city where if you do find an arborist, there's only 2 people listed for our city, which has over 100,000 population, and it's 13.5 square miles here in Lynn. So one of my questions is just still about the same thing, but I was wondering if you could share any experiences where like your risk assessment was involved with some sort of liability or legal thing, maybe in a municipal setting, because that seems to be where, at least in my experience, risk aversion is pretty high, and it could be a positive to have tree risk assessment done, or it may be something that is not able to be facilitated by the current system. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, good question. So I haven't done anything yet because I've been certified so recently ago that I haven't been involved in a legal anything yet. However, that was one thing that the instructors clarified at the course is if you do this for any long period of time, you should expect to be involved in court-related testimony of some kind, and oftentimes they said that will be more likely that you did an assessment and you gave a risk rating and then the property owner then elected to not go forward with some type of work. So oftentimes you're there not because you did something wrong, but because someone wants to show that an assessment was done and the property owner did not act within their duty of care according to whatever their responsibility is. Certainly though, like, I see municipally that does hold relevant. Like, for example, I'm with the Shade Tree Commission in Oakmont. I got asked to look at a tree the other day about the roots are in the sewer line. I do the same thing where I say, look, we're not going to move a healthy tree. Like, it's terracotta. Terracotta doesn't last forever. The roots are not there because they got in there. They're in there because your terracotta is very old. You need to replace your terracotta line with PVC. And, he went on a whole tangent about, well, the trees are in the lines and the trees are lifting the sidewalk and the tree is filthy. And what do you do when the tree falls down on something? And so it's kind of one of those things where, like, he could, if he wanted to, probably explore some type of legal something, and then I might be called either informally with the solicitor to start at the borough, and then maybe even later, depending on how far it goes, might be called to talk about, well, why did I say this tree didn't meet the qualifications for the borough to remove it, because I'm involved in that duty of care to decide what happens to the trees in the public right of way. And I would explain the condition of the tree versus what the actual concerns were and how the concerns could be mitigated without removal of the tree. And we'd go down that road. So I can definitely see how that could be relevant. Even too, there was one example recently, a tree a few months ago failed, part of it failed in the storm. It wasn't a total tree failure, just part of it. And the person who lived there said, well, they might have a lawsuit necessary because 7 years ago, and I remember 7 years ago, they reached out and said, we're concerned this tree may fail someday. And it was just a general statement, nothing specific about the tree, just it may fail someday. And we had some pruning done as a way to, help mitigate some risk. And the tree failed in a very severe thunderstorm. There was a severe thunderstorm warning for winds of 65 miles per hour or higher. So, I explained that, look, this tree failed in extreme weather. Just because you said the tree might fail someday doesn't prove that you're right now 7 years later. It just, it failed in the storm. So there definitely are ways I could see that if a resident wanted to pursue that legal action, that would involve me in some capacity getting some type of statement, or potentially even as a court thing if it went that far, to talk about the merits of that tree and what I saw and things like that. So definitely, if you're worried about ever being involved in some type of legal setting, tree risk assessment is something you should consider if you really want to do that or not. That is one thing that will probably happen at some point in your lifetime as a tree risk assessment professional.
Thank you. The way you explain it is awesome, because it really sounds like, and you really made the point well, that it improves your communication. So should those things happen, you would be able to kind of have your statements thought through. You'd be able to stick by some of these technical terms, and you'd kind of be setting yourself up to best help the municipality, the property owner, whoever is needing help with that duty of care stuff. You'd be setting them up to with the vocabulary. You'd have the terminology to help them with their issues. So thank you.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's the importance of the disclaimer. Definitely want to be insured, whether you're working for a company or whether you're your own personal consultant. You want to have, probably a decent insurance policy as well. So once I got track certified, I talked with my supervisor, WPC, and said, hey, we should sit down with HR real quick and just review what our insurance policy is. Do we need to make additions to the language? So just making sure that you're taking care of yourself and having all those disclaimers and insurances and whatnot set up in case you would need it at some point in the future.
That's a very good point, especially if cities are starting kind of new urban forestry approaches or new urban forestry programs. That's what we're doing here in Lynn. We would definitely want to look into like how the processes are being constructed and where something like this might fit in. That's a good point. And I'm seeing, Phil, thanks for the announcement that the Municipal Forestry Institute registration is currently open. We were just able to join the Urban and Community Forestry Society here, and I definitely recommend that. I think them and the local ISA chapters announce like the upcoming track locations. I think someone put in the chat already a link for eligibility and the credential and where you could kind of take that. I think some really great points about the regional aspects of it. Like, I think it's cool, Brian, that you traveled to take yours. That may work for some folks. You may also be more interested in taking it locally, so you could use those websites to see where they are. And go ahead, Phil, I see you're unmuted.
Well, Erica, did you take on a new job? And I wonder if anyone else has taken on new jobs, because I noticed that your email has changed.
I'm in a different office with a different headset. So yes, I accepted in June. I started as the Urban Forestry Fellow for the city of Lynn, Massachusetts. We're a coastal city. We don't have nearly as much of an urban forestry program as Boston did for the last 5 years. So I'm really excited to be kind of working on an Arbor Day Inflation Reduction Act pass-through grant with the U.S. Forest Service. That was the first round of funding that we got. And we also just recently were awarded and are about to accept 2 more grants for tree planting and tree pit expansion here in Lynn. But the way they wrote my position was very holistic. So we're able to do things like help out the DPW and, you know, there's a few folks in town. We're going to be forming a tree committee. We don't have a tree coalition yet, so we can't really be part of the September 18th meeting here for UEC. But yeah, new position, and my colleague Amara from Mass Audubon is still doing an excellent job running the Boston Tree Alliance. So I'm very happy to see you here, Amara. And just a quick shout out that Mass Audubon is hiring an urban and community forester right now. So if you want to work on the Boston Tree Alliance, go talk to Amara and maybe check out that job posting.
What a great opportunity. Thank you. Are there any other announcements? Love to hear when people move up or are managing a new grant from the Forest Service. That's interesting. Brian, thanks again. That was a great presentation.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
We have 10:59. I think, Erica, do we have any other things we want to add? I think we may have reached the end of our beautiful time here with you, Brian. Erica,
I
you
think
can just close us out. Yeah.
I think we're all good. I'm going to put the link to the new website that I made for my own position and program in the chat, just as a little plug. Brian, if you could email us like the links that you want sent out or anything, any tidbits that you really thought were the big things, we'll include those in our follow-up. We'll send out the recording to this talk and post it on our YouTube, and we will see everybody in September for a discussion about tree coalitions. So thank you so much, everyone. And thank you especially, Brian. What a great presentation about track.